Hello, welcome back. All right, let's continue our little pedagogical tour here of some of the, again, some of the advice or things you may want to, discussions you may want to have with faculty members that you're working with, concerning how they could optimize their use of peerScholar really to make for the maximum learning experience. We are going to talk about giving and receiving feedback, but I really realized that in the previous video, when I talked about using rubrics, there's something I should have shown you within the system that I did not show you. So I'm going to show you now. So before we get to the feedback issue, let's get our heads back to the previous video for just a moment. The video where I was telling you about the notion of having students apply a rubric to the work of their peers. All right, so I'm going to leave my PowerPoint here for a second, and I'm going to go into peerScholar, and I'm logged in here now as an instructor. And I just want to show you if, should you talk to a faculty member and they say, yes, oh, I like that idea of a rubric, let's do it. What does that entail? What does it mean to do it? And it really means two things. It means A, making sure a copy of the rubric is attached for students to see and use, and I'll be a little more clear about that. And B, setting up a so-called matrix as one of the assessments that students do as peers. So I'm going to create a brand new activity here, and I'll call this rubric, I guess, as we go through. All right, create this activity. And I'm not going to create the whole activity. I'll just do the critical parts. And the critical parts would be, first, when you give the instructions, remember we talked about alignment. So let's imagine we're going to ask people, we want to teach students how to argue. And I think I have a rubric I've already used for that. So by the way, let me just take this as an option to say that when you try to attach something, you can either go to your hard drive and find it, but once you've used things in the past, they all end up in My Media. And so you can get a set of resources here that you can just ultimately reuse. And I don't know if I've named it as well as I would like. Let's take this critical analysis rubric. We'll use this one. So I'm going to use this rubric. And if we want to see it, by the way, at any point, we can click on it. There it is. Okay. So this is a rubric for a critical analysis. All right, cool. So let's assume that's what the instructor wants to do. Okay, so one of the things you want to do is, just as I did, and let me be clear because I kind of did that a little quick, you attach it as one of the attachments. And that means when the students see these instructions, they will also see that list of attachments and they can open it up. And you could, in fact, refer to this, when creating your composition, please refer to the attached rubric. And you might go on to say, something like, this is the rubric we'll be using when we're assessing each other's work, etc. And so you include that rubric and you got it there. Okay, that's great. So they know now when they're composing, this is sort of what they're going to be judged in, and they can use that to help them compose, right? Make sure that they've kind of hit all these points as well as they can. Okay, cool, that's fine. So now they've all composed, they've all submitted, and they're going to assess one another. So again, you can add a bunch of things to the assess form, and remember, those are the things that will appear on the right when the students see the work. So they can go through those assessments. And what we're going to do is create one of these, a so-called matrix. But we're going to create a matrix that aligns with this rubric. Okay, so this is just one of the tools you can use. You see it over here, matrix. And it just basically, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, but let's take a look at this matrix in a little more detail here. Okay, the comments are going to be a little tricky. We'll probably just have one comment box to do that. Or, I mean, we could literally create 5 comment boxes, one related to each thing if we wished. But let's assume that one comment box will suffice. And so what we're really going to replicate is everything up to the comment box. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 levels of goodness, let's say, and then a title for the factor. And then we've got 5 different factors here. Okay, so fantastic. So we say, well, we've got 5 different factors. We're going to have the titles there, and we need 4 different levels for the factors. Okay, introduction, main points, organization. I don't want to belabor this too much, so introduction, main points, organization, I think I said. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead and correct me. Did it correct me? Doesn't matter. We're not going to get too. Oh, it's got 2 T's. Whatever. We're not going to get too worried about it. Style and mechanics. Okay. Now you might also notice something a little interesting about this. So naturally we just get these labels across the top, but we could put in, I guess we would just put the 2, 4, 3. So 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice, oops, sorry, didn't want this one there. I've just ended up picking a label for that. But notice that we've basically mimicked that matrix. However, there's one other thing I want to show you, which is this little gear here. This little gear assigns the value. And notice that, you know, by default, we're not sure. Some matrices go like this one does, from best to worst. Some go from worst to best, and we don't know. So if you're really going to use these scores, you want to make them match the point values they're supposed to have. And I'm not exactly sure why this one, the worst you can do on any one of these is a 2, but apparently that is the case for this matrix, for this rubric. So we would simply do that. And so this has no impact on what you see here. It's still the matrix, but the point is once people choose values, those values will be turned into, oh, sorry, I missed the bottom row. Those values will be turned into a score, and the score will be calculated by giving the appropriate points, you know, based on the thing that was connected. So when you're setting up the rubric, you have to think of that too. It says that a prompt is required again. Please use this. Please use consult. So again, now just to make that picture, the attached rubric, and then we might say, then use the matrix below to indicate your ratings. All right, and so now what students will actually see is this. And so again, the idea is that they would take a look at that PDF, see what it says about introduction. So let's just save this. So for example, they would skip over here, read these various things and say, okay, I think this person will get a 4 or should get a 4. And then they would use that matrix and click on 4 for introduction and conclusion. And then they would go to the next one, etc. Okay, so that's really it for the rubric thing. I just wanted to be clear with you that you know, that's how you actually set it up once people have bought into rubric. Attach the rubric and then create the matrix to match the rubric, making sure you think about those values in all the cells and using that gear as necessary to change those values. Okay, cool, excellent. Now back to our regular scheduled topic for today. All right, giving and receiving feedback. Yes, let's jump into here. So every peerScholar activity is really 2 activities. So in my melodramatic way, we're going to use Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as our example here. 2 individuals living within the same body. In a sense, there are 2 tasks living within every peerScholar activity. The Dr. Jekyll task, I call it Dr. Jekyll because I'll associate with the instructor. This is what the instructor asks the students to do. So, you know, if it's a critical analysis, this is going to change dramatically depending on whether it's a physics course or a philosophy course or a nursing course or whatever, right? Students are going to be asked to do very different things. And so a lot of variability in this aspect of the peerScholar task. But once they do that, so you can kind of associate Dr. Jekyll with phase 1 of peerScholar, the create phase, right? That's the Dr. Jekyll phase. And so they do that to the best of their ability, and there it is. And now they enter the assess phase, and through the assess and the reflect, we're actually touching on the Dr. Hyde thing, which is to say, in every peerScholar activity, every time it's used, no matter the context, students are asked to give constructive feedback to their peers and then to learn from the feedback that their peers gave to them. So there's always this training of giving quality feedback and learning to learn from feedback. And that's part of every peerScholar activity, and it's a really important part. This is a really good thing. So one of the things I want to stress is that having this intense training, learning, having students, doing this in a range of courses as they go through your programs is really, really beneficial for them for two distinct reasons. First of all, with respect to giving feedback and learning to give feedback well, that prepares students for all sorts of situations in life where they are sort of in a more supervisory role. So maybe they're managing a team, and in which case, you have to learn how to tell those members of the team who aren't pulling their weight or doing what needs to be done, you have to learn how to explain that to them and get them on team, on task. And that requires this ability to give feedback in an effective way. If you're working with a team full of people, you guys have to probably all give feedback to each other to find an effective way of interacting in a good way. And I also like to always stress this. It's very easy to think about careers for students and very appropriate to think about careers. So these are things that will help them in career kind of context. But giving feedback, perhaps the most critical context in which we give constructive feedback regularly, is in our role as parents. And all of our students will very soon be parents. So if we're teaching them how to criticize, I'll use that word, their children with the best intents, right? To help them, learn how to behave more appropriately and be liked by society and all that kind of stuff. Well, then you have to learn how to do that in a good, effective way, or else you're just going to have a lot of fights, right? And that's the real important point about giving feedback effectively. It's to help guide learning. But when it goes wrong, it turns into some sort of fight. And so that's the critical skill, is learning how to not let it go wrong. Okay, so very powerful, very important skill. On the receiving end, perhaps even more powerful. I first want to say, by the way, it's hard for us to learn from critical feedback. Critical feedback makes us feel like we're being attacked, and our natural response to attack is to fight or flee. Okay? What we want students to do is learn how to sit there, listen, think, and then use what they consider useful to improve. Okay, this is not a natural thing for anybody, but again, with repeated structured practice, the unnatural can become natural. And so this is, putting students in the situation where they get feedback and asking them to learn from it is very important, because to the extent a student can do this, they're viewed as coachable, right? So imagine you're a manager and you've given constructive feedback to, say, 6 employees. You've told them ways they could be better. And let's say 3 of them thereafter change their behavior. And they change their behavior in ways that suggest that they thought about your feedback and ultimately agreed with it because their behavioral change reflects that. What do you think of those employees? You think good things, right? You think they're coachable. These are employees that listen and that learn and that adapt their behavior. That is the sign from people higher up that this person has a potential, has a future, can learn and grow. It is really core to interpersonal growth, this ability to accept and learn from constructive feedback. And it predicts success in your career, again, and it predicts your success in life. Okay, because you run into critical feedback in all realms of life. And so, yeah, learning how to do the unnatural, learning how to listen, think, and adjust your behavior is really important to your own personal growth. All right, so hey, this is a big part of every peerScholar activity, and that's really cool. It can be maximized, right? And that's sort of the theme of these videos we're talking about now. Given this is an important thing, and given they're going to be learning these skills anyway, why don't we set things up so that they're in the best position to learn them in the strongest way? And there's really 3 levers we have within peerScholar to do this. One is the instructions in the assess phase. I think I alluded to this in the quick demo I gave you, but we're going to focus on this a little bit more in just a moment. That through the right instructions, you can, well, I shouldn't say through the right instructions, but I say if you attend to the instructions or to the opportunity that exists in the instructions, you can really help your students, A, understand what good feedback looks like, so you can educate them about that. And in the process of educating, you're also going to be what's called calibrating the students. You're going to be getting them all on the same page. So if they all get the same message about this is what your feedback should look like, this is what good feedback should look like, then well, first of all, they're all going to be responding to each other in the same way, which is good. They will understand that, they'll understand someone's feedback because it sort of came from the same place as theirs. But they're learning what this good feedback looks like. Again, think ahead to when they're talking to their kids or having little disagreements. Hopefully these lessons will be there. So I'm going to do this hands-on, but let's just talk about the other levers. The second lever is the instructions in the reflect phase. So it's really the same kind of story, but it's about learning from feedback now. So we have an opportunity here for educating and motivating students, how and why to learn from feedback. And the motivation step is critical here because, as I just suggested in the previous slide, learning from feedback is not natural, not from critical feedback. We want to fight it or flee. And so sometimes, motivating students, explaining to them why it's important that they spend the time and the effort learning is critical to them actually spending the time and the effort. Okay, so this motivational thing can be really important, and the motivation comes from the education, right? It's this is how it's going to benefit you, and so once you understand that, then there's your motivation. Okay, and now finally, they've done the instructions in the reflect phase, and they're actually now looking at the feedback. Remember, you can ask them to assess the feedback in a very direct way. You can create a set of questions they have to answer for every piece of feedback. So that assessment of the feedback is, again, another powerful lever that can be used to guide how the students analyze the feedback. I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of that. Okay, so let's just jump there. And so we've got our peerScholar activity here. That we've just sort of created very roughly. But right now, with the assess and the reflect phase, there are generic instructions. And they're pretty good. They're fine. The generic instructions will probably be altered in the near future, almost in complete accord with what I'm about to tell you. So by the time you're looking at these instructions, they may look different than what you're seeing in front of you right now. Because I'm now I'm so high on this sort of feedback idea that I think I want to incorporate it in our sort of canned instructions too. So let's just kind of talk about that. What would I do differently, and what would I suggest? Well, in this assess phase, what I would say to instructors is there are all sorts of resources for how to give effective, constructive feedback. All right. So, I mean, literally, we could have our own canned things, but there's a lot of things on the web, and I want to kind of encourage faculty members or others to have this sort of exploratory learning mindset. So they could literally find resources online. Even perhaps better, you can go to YouTube. And you could find, let's do that. Why not, right? Okay, this Safari doesn't do this by default. I'm not a Safari guy. And it shows, I guess. So if we go to youtube.com, and I should have copied and pasted that, how to learn effectively. How to learn effectively. Or sorry, how to give effective, constructive. Should come up now. No. Feedback. Too many words. But you get the idea. So all sorts of things, right? How to give effective criticism, the art of manliness. You see, I might not choose that one. But other ones, and this is why I kind of like to suggest to faculty that they take this sort of exploratory attitude. There might be certain perspectives. This is one I often use. But it's also a manager kind of situation. I quite like it because she spells out 5 very specific characteristics that good constructive feedback should have. But again, anything that the person wants. So this one's both giving and receiving feedback. So let's say for whatever reason we like this.
Giving feedback.
All right, and it's one of these fancy little thingamaboppers. Well, now when we're creating our peerScholar activity, we can so first of all edit the instructions, and then I'll say something like, let's say we wanted to put it here, before giving constructive feedback, to your peers, please watch this video. Students like videos. We'll talk about that a lot in the next video, he says to his students. But again, you can put this right in the instructions. And now, again, if we kind of look at our little eye over here, and we go to our assess phase, and we see our instructions, you know, they can watch this right within, sure. They can watch this right within their instructions.
A 2009
right? So they read it and they just come right to it. There we go. So, you know, kind of nice while they're in the moment, you can hit them with that and get them that clear sense of what's going on. And I highly recommend this. So you can also link, you could link to any one of these, you know, sites. I mean, we actually have a PDF here. If you want to link to this PDF, that's cool. And you notice a lot of them have things like this. If you can't think of a constructive purpose for giving feedback, don't give it at all. Okay, we don't give that option in peerScholar, but they have some very clear things that they're focusing on. It's almost like a rubric, right? For any one of these, you could say how weak or strong, or did this person giving you the feedback, you know, how well did they do this? So you could make a matrix out of these if you wanted. But again, this is why I would kind of recommend that the faculty member look and say, yeah, I think that's really in line with the context that I want them to learn the feedback in. And you direct them to those resources. Okay, cool. Now, that's really all I suggest for the assess. That's one of our levers. The other lever, I'm going to come back to this lever up here. The other lever is the reflect instructions, where you can do the same sort of thing, except, you know, rather than how to give, we'd say how to learn from. And yeah, my default would be YouTube. The best way is to accept constructive feedback. I use this TEDx talk a lot because she's really showing the relevance of learning from feedback. So it's sort of a higher level, you know, why this is going to benefit you in your life. So at any rate, any of these things can be like short little experiences the students have that really, okay, so let's say these things again, calibrate them, get them all thinking about it the same way, educate them. And, you know, I use the TEDx one because I feel like it's very motivating, that it really shows students this is worth your time. Like, take the time and do this because you're learning a skill that'll benefit you all through your life. But again, same idea, soup up these reflect instructions to better kind of punch that and get students prepared for it. Now, the third lever that I suggested was through the assessment that you have them do. So let me kind of bop over here and I'm going to go, I'm on the student side now, sorry. This is my demo. So I'm going to go over to the reflect phase and I'm going to show you, so here a student would have read through the peer one's feedback given to them, and especially this is the constructive criticism. And then you can ask them specifically to rate that. So you'll notice, I'm going to pop back to the instructor side here. By default, there's just a how useful was this? Okay, a very basic assessment. Again, that may have changed by the time you see this because I may have done what we're talking about as a default by then. But you can go ahead and change that as you will. And again, a couple of examples here. One example might be just to separate usefulness from emotionality. I told you that we want to fight or flee when people criticize us. We have an emotional reaction to feedback. One of the ways to teach students to control that emotional reaction is to first make them acknowledge it, that it exists. So you could literally say, what emotions did this feedback create? Now notice you can echo this back to the giver of the feedback too, right? So they can ultimately see, I gave feedback to 5 people. What emotions did my feedback generate? And if the emotions are, let's say, angry, embarrassed, confused, if that's what you see that your feedback is causing, yeah, your feedback's not that good, right? That's not what you want. What you would love, of course, is enlightened, maybe not happy, but at least enlightened. Well, maybe that would be the optimal response. I'm not sure. Okay, so this is a very sort of high level, just separating the usefulness from the emotionality. You can also remember how some of those things listed very specific components that feedback can have. Well, you can reattach to those. So remember, they watched that in the assess phase, right? In the instructions, we said, this is what good feedback looks like. And now in the reflect phase, you can say, okay, now you're looking at feedback. And I told you what good feedback should look like, the components it should have. Analyze this feedback you're looking at now. How much does it have those components? And so we have these 5 little components. Don't worry about that. I'm not sure I'd turn that off. My goodness. At any rate, yeah, you can go ahead and rate those components on that scale, which is just, again, a really good way for students to kind of get in their head, both while they're giving feedback and now while they're receiving it. What does good feedback look like? Okay, yeah, and that's the third lever. Okay, so and of course you would create that just by using this tool again and doing your thing there, creating that with whatever tools you need to map onto the questions. All righty, cool. So returning to here then, we did a little bit more than expected thanks to returning to the issue of the rubrics, but there we go. Feedback learning, always happening in peerScholar, and a good thing too because it's a really, really powerful thing for students to learn, especially if they learn it in all these different contexts, but it's the same basic skills they're learning. And peerScholar, if you really want to optimize that learning, you have these 3 levers to do that. So another great thing to talk to instructors about when they're thinking about peerScholar, letting them know how it can really, take the learning up to another level. Excellent. We're going to stop this video, and my next video will be about using video. Well, not just video. It'll be about going beyond the written word. That's what I should have titled it. I don't think I did. But how you can, with peerScholar, give students very different kinds of compositions to create that they really love, and why that can really maximize learning as well. So that'll be video 2.3. I will see you there later.